Max Kaiser, do you say pleb or plebe?
I say pleb, because I think that's historically where, you find it, the plebeian, pleb. But I think the plebs say plebe. So, like hodl, it's become a pleb thing to say plebe. So I guess plebe is the way to say pleb.
Right, because that's kind of in the news. This is what this whole thing is about. Oh, let me move my mic up a little bit like an elite. It's the plebeians, see, I said plebeian. I say pleb, but plebeian.
The plebeians.
Plebeian. Right. So, there are multiple ways to say many words, but the fact is that we have a pleb versus patrician, the elite sort of mindset, right? That's happening right now. And it's taking place amongst the billionaire class. And that is Michael Saylor pleb versus Elon Musk patrician. So those who would seek to rule or be the elite. Dollar billionaires must struggle to retain their wealth. Satoshi billionaires only need patiently hodl. That's Jameson Lopp looking at this conflict going on. And then I want to read this one that's a really good tweet here. Billionaires tweeting the diamond hands emoji should be canceled for the cultural appropriation of poor folk memes. They are not one of us. They are not one of us, Max.
Yeah, no, this is really interesting, this Michael Saylor versus Elon Musk, and how it has kind of divided along lines of plebe versus toff, a word used in the UK to describe aristocrats and patricians, and people wouldn't normally associate Michael Saylor with pleb or plebe because he is a billionaire, and but the way his approach to Bitcoin is with utmost humility. Like he believes the protocol is this thing of beauty, is aesthetically enriching, and so he approaches it with great reverence. Whereas Elon Musk takes the high-handed, patrician, overweened, spoiled brat approach of, I just found out about Bitcoin and I'm here to fix it. He hasn't done any due diligence, and he's made a total jackass out of himself. But it's interesting how these two are now squaring off on Twitter. You got Elon Musk will say some cryptic tweet really revealing his total ignorance on the subject. And then Michael Saylor will respond with 10 data points that just shoot everything down. And everyone is now kind of divided in the community. The Jameson Lopp quote really resonates deeply for a number of reasons, because it sets up this whole new way of thinking in a big way. If you're a fiat billionaire or you're tied to fiat, you spend a lot of time and energy maintaining that wealth. When I was working on Wall Street for many years, there's a saying that it's just as hard to maintain your wealth as it is to make your wealth. And that's true, because once you achieve a certain amount of wealth, you've got all these taxes to consider and all these different there's a lot that comes with it. Managing wealth is actually a fairly complicated and stressful environment, similar to just trying to make that wealth. But with Bitcoin, as Jameson Lopp's pointing out here, you're doing nothing except just being patient and watching the world flame apart, and your ship is rising. There's not much more to do than that. So it's very, very interesting, this dynamic.
Yeah, and it's all playing out online, and this great revolution happening, the great migration to Bitcoin, the hyper Bitcoinization. And there's another thing, this energy FUD is playing out with this the plebeian versus elite. I guess I like toff. I like toff better than patrician or elite or anything like that. I think I like the toff.
Toff. I didn't know the whole full version of this until I was watching Downton Abbey, and the patriarch of the Downton Abbey clan refers to someone else as toffee nosed. So I believe a toffee nosed is the full epithet, and shortened to toff.
Plebeian in Wikipedia is defined as this. The plebeians, also called plebs or plebes, were in ancient Rome the general body of free Roman citizens who were not patricians as determined by the census, or in other words, commoners. So, let's look at the elite financial press and then how Elon Musk responded to this, revealing himself, his true nature, as being filled with envy for Elon Musk. And this is Adam Sampson I think he's from the FT. He says, everything Elon Musk ever wanted to know about Bitcoin's growing energy problem, but was afraid to ask. An excellent FT read by Katie Martin FX and Nauman Billy. So this is Bitcoin's growing energy problem. It's a dirty currency. The headline there says, as you can see, all those coal stacks and smokestacks and a Bitcoin over the horizon. But first I want to read a pleb who responded to this, and then I'll get into the Elon Musk. We'll get into the Elon Musk, Michael Saylor thing, because obviously that guy was tweeting at Michael Saylor. But Midnight Hodl says this one line, he's referring to a line from the article, sums it up. It's easy to describe 40% renewable energy as dirty while ignoring the financial incentive it might give for future green projects and wasted energy consumption. If we were to listen to journalists, we would never improve and accomplish anything. So the line he's referring to is this from the FT article. Honestly, I don't care what Bitcoin does. I care that it is hugely energy intensive and that there are maybe better ways to go about Bitcoin mining than this very inefficient, very energy intensive process, they quote. I don't care what Bitcoin does.
Right. And this is peeling the curtain back. And the writer is admitting that they're writing propaganda.
Yeah.
Right? They don't care the facts. They don't care the context. But they've been given a job from the editor to write a propaganda piece, a smear piece. And this is what it is. I don't care that I'm writing propaganda, but it's my job and I'm writing propaganda.
It's also the toffs don't care about the plebes or the plebs, the deplorables, the basket of deplorables. They don't care what you think. They don't care that that your individual sovereignty, all the good things that Bitcoin brings to you, but they actually do care. I think they do care. And that's in the next tweet from the same guy, Midnight Hodl. And it brings me back to Paul Krugman, because Paul Krugman is also very anti-Bitcoin. He was also very anti-internet. And we spoke about this in our interview recently. You may have seen it with Mark Friedrich. And we talked about Paul Krugman and his role as a gatekeeper to the elite and his role as kind of a toady, a jester to the elite. So Midnight Hodl points out that if we were to listen to you, there even wouldn't be an internet, one of the most disruptive and liberating technologies. Perhaps you should spend some more time actually doing something to improve our lives and planet we live on. And he's referring to that article from May 31st, 1999, dig more coal, the PCs are coming. So they said the same thing in 1999 when the elite, when the patricians, when the toffs, whenever you want to call them, they realized that this power of the internet and connecting humans all across the earth could leverage the power of the plebeians, the plebs, the plebes against the elite.
Right. Why is also... you've got the that Musk is associated with the aristocratic classes because almost his entirety of his fortune's tied to government-issued carbon credits. So he's tied in with the government closely. He's not doing stuff that would be completely independent of the government. He's actually a government apparatchik, right? So he exists entirely on carbon credits. So I think, he's got the tap on the shoulder, and he's been tasked with trying to go after Bitcoin. You got Janet Yellen, you got Jay Powell, you got central bankers, you got the IMF, you've got Christine Lagarde. You've got a lot of folks that are attacking Bitcoin now because then they of course understand it's a threat to them. And I think that Elon Musk got the tap on the shoulder as well. I think that was the NBC Saturday Night Live performance as part of that. To essentially create a mythological creature that can be used as propaganda, and he's being used as a propaganda tool. But, the fact that Paul Krugman has been wrong for so many years, and he's also the house monkey over there at the New York Times who's been pushing propaganda for years and years. Nothing he says makes any economic sense. But this energy FUD is so absurd. There's absolutely nothing within it that makes any sense whatsoever. It's easily dispelled. The fact is also that Michael Saylor said something in an interview where, when asked about this, he was talking about why anyone would disparage the energy usage of Bitcoin, which is 1/10 of 1% of global energy usage, 1/10 of 1% of global energy usage. Why anyone would disparage this and ignore the fact that it's guaranteeing for billions of people private property rights and access to a store of value and a medium of exchange is really heinous and atrocious and a violation of human rights. He makes that point. So Elon has to ask himself, does he really want to be on the side of those who are attacking human rights around the world? Which at the moment, that's what he's done. And it is quite a heinous act on his part to throw 5 billion people, under the bus effectively and give them a big fuck you. It's despicable to be quite honest.
I think, the point is our ancestors throughout all the revolutions that have happened that got us to this place, they were willing to sacrifice their lives for liberty. And Bitcoin delivers liberty. And the fact that people are like, I'm going to fly in my private jet to come lecture you about whether or not the energy used to preserve your liberty is worth it.
We talk about it with our guests coming up in the interview. And the comment made was that the relativity factor between, where is this energy being used, right? Because according to the Paul Krugmans of the world, any energy use that's not sanctioned by the elites is false. And they don't take into consideration the context of this energy use in any way. And the fact that it is liberating billions of people from subjugation by oligarchs, plutocrats, kleptocrats, and the US dollar hegemony never factors into their conversation and never weighs into their cost-benefit analysis. Okay? If the cost-benefit analysis is, I'm willing to spend 150 terawatt hours a year to secure a global value network that frees 7 billion people from the tyranny of centralized governments and centralized banks. Okay, and it's 1/10 of 1% of all energy globally expended currently. Are we willing to take the step off planet kleptocracy? Are we willing? This is the way, this is the path, this is the way. Are we willing to do it? I mean, Musk is saying, no, I want to stay tethered to a planet of oligarchs, elites, aristocrats, and carbon credits, and Comcast, CNBC types, enlisting me in effectively a psyops campaign. He's comfortable with that. He's a freak. He's an enemy of the people.
The plebs always win, and this is the revolution that we're reporting on. Essentially, the revolution is happening, and the elite will always have a let them eat cake moment. They'll always have those sort of moments. Tsar Nicholas had that as well. Like when the peasants were outside his palace in St. Petersburg, like he genuinely just thought, oh, this is just a fad. It's just going to go away. These deplorables obviously can't rule themselves, right? They need me. Like this always happens. These sort of this is a pivotal moment in history, and what Bitcoin has delivered is, the peaceful revolution, and that's happening whether they want it or not. They don't want it, but that's the point. Michael Saylor had responded to this guy Adam Samson. What's his name? Yeah, Adam Samson. He said, Bitcoin is electric money. Real cars use more electricity than toy cars. The article above is full of logical errors and falsehoods. Bitcoin is the most efficient technology for converting energy into prosperity we have yet to devise. We, of course, heard that similar from our friend who is the particle physicist that we spoke to, who said that, this is the first time it's been done where you convert energy directly into currency, and that has never happened. Convert it to money.
Right. It's backed by energy. You're converting energy into the hardest money ever known in humanity to such a perfect degree. You create perfect money, and you will actually potentially engender an evolutionary step change in our species toward altruism, which we have the ability for altruism, but we don't use it. That's the tragedy of it all, is that we can be altruistic, but we don't use it. Other species do use altruism, and humans do use altruism from time to time as a strategy in survival. Sometimes the way to survive is to be altruistic, but it's been overridden by this incredible monetization of war and violence, which is very easy to profit from war if you print the money to go to war. Now, if you get rid of that and demonetize war and violence, and you monetize love, peace, and altruism, you're going to have an evolutionary step change, which is what we're on the verge of. And Elon is just putting his foot in the way. He's putting his thumb in the pie, whatever is, he's getting in the way. He's becoming an obstructionist because he's a narcissist. It's all about him. And if it's not all about him, he's going to do whatever he can to get in the way. He's like the classic, kid on the playfield. It's like, well, if you don't do it my way, I'm taking the ball. Right? It's my ball. I'm taking the ball. It's like, don't be such a, 2-year-old whiny little cuck. Just get off the playing field if you can't handle it, and let us get on with it.
I think he is genuinely, from his tweets at Michael Saylor on Thursday, what it seemed to me was that he is genuinely insecure, and he feels intimidated by Michael Saylor. He tweeted and deleted 2 things. I did manage to capture one of them, but one of them he was like, Michael Gigachad Saylor, like very insecurely. And then he did this in response to when Michael Saylor sent the thing about, electric money. He said, it's not the bull market. You really are a genius. Like, and somebody, of course, in the Bitcoin meme community went through there and said, it's not all the government, credits. It's, you really are a genius, Elon,
Yeah, well, this is where I think the psyops and the government connection comes into play. And when you put them on like a Saturday Night Live, and then you have the FT and the New York Times and everybody, that's the signal to repeat everything this guy says as part of this massive psyops. But the protocol has sussed this out long ago. And I really think the chances now of Elon joining John McAfee in prison are, I thought the chances, a few weeks ago, I'd say, hey, this guy looks like he wants to go to prison. And maybe he got a 10% chance. But I think we're talking 80, 90% chance now that within 18 months, Elon will be sitting in a jail cell, which is exactly where he belongs.
Well, I hope not, because I think prisons are just a waste of time and energy and money, and I don't like to have to pay for them. We have very high taxes here in the U.S. Millions of people are in prison. It's a prison industrial surveillance state, and that's pretty shitty, in my opinion. But, in terms of this, the plebs versus the elite, the monarchy, the toffs, and I think, I think the FUD is coming fast and furious, but I think it's weaker and weaker, and I think it's having less power. And I think our interview coming up is worth jumping to it now, because it's with Slushpool, and we go into this, and they have a great response because they're obviously run the longest running mining pool in Bitcoin, and they've mined over 1 million Bitcoin. So, are they boiling the oceans? Are they, doing all this FUD, handing everything over to China like the FUD says? All right, I'm super excited. We have two guests. This is the first time we've done two guests in one episode, Max, and it's time to have them join us. They are Jan Capek and Edward Evenson from Slush Pool, the oldest Bitcoin mining pool in operation. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for having us. Hi.
Right. So you guys are from Brains originally, and you just recently bought Slush Pool from Slush, who we attended the first ever Bitcoin conference in Prague in 2011. He was there as well. So Slush Pool right now has about, according to the data I found online, you probably have different data, of course, has about 3.4% of the hash rate. So you're in the top 10 of the mining pools. Explain to the audience, first of all, because we've spoken to miners here on the program before, but never like somebody who's operating a mining pool. What exactly is a mining pool, and like who would your customer normally be, and why do they join a mining pool?
Okay, I'll try to go over the technical part. So basically, if you want to mine Bitcoin and if you want to do it solo, the problem is that Bitcoin is mined in blocks, and the amount of blocks that you find is directly proportional to the computing power that you possess. And the total hash rate, the computing power behind Bitcoin mining, is pretty big. So if you were trying to do this in solo mode, basically trying to find the blocks on your own, it could take you quite a long time depending on the hash rate. If you, however, combine your computing resources with other miners and use the pool, which is the service that concentrates the miners at some point and distributes the jobs, you're basically reducing this variance. I'm intentionally saying you're not increasing your probability of finding a block because it is the same, but you are basically sharing the luck or unluck of the whole group of miners joining the same pool. So the main point of having a pool, so essentially concentrating some of the computing power behind Bitcoin mining, is really to reduce the variance when you're trying to find a Bitcoin block and share the reward among multiple groups of miners, depending on on the size of your operation. So that's pretty much. And this is a concept that has been invented by Slush back in 2011. That's when the pool was started.
2010.
Yeah, it was kind of a new concept at the time because up until then, nowhere in the white paper or in the online chats from Satoshi, etc., we're talking about mining pools, I believe. So when it first appeared, there was some thought about, geez, is this going to somehow violate the protocol in some way? But it proved to be resilient to mining pools, correct?
I think it is correct because miners always have the choice switching over the hash rate, so it's not really a problem. It's probably, I would say this is more of a convenience service that exists, and that there was a direct incentive for something like this to really appear in the industry. And maybe an interesting point is that why miners don't build their own pools. They actually do it these days, but it is a completely different sport from running your own operation. Pretty much the same way, like we as a mining pool don't try to really penetrate the physical mining industry in terms of like building our own facilities, because that's a different domain, really.
Right. So obviously miners are in the news in the last few weeks. The FUD is flying fast and furious. So it mostly, on the one hand, you're apparently boiling the oceans. On the other hand, it's all controlled by China. So, Slush Pool has mined over 1 million Bitcoin. But the great hash rate migration is happening right now in China. Explain to everybody what this the hash rate migration is, what the role of China is in Bitcoin. Do they control it? And are they boiling the oceans? It's a lot. So first start with does China control Bitcoin?
No, China does not control Bitcoin. That narrative has become popular because there's a large concentration of the global network hash rate in China. It's distributed primarily amongst two provinces, being Xinjiang and Sichuan. And we are currently in the midst of the Great Migration, as you said, where most of the hash rate in China ships from Xinjiang to Sichuan because the rainy season begins and hydropower is plentiful and very cheap down in Sichuan. Part of the narrative also comes from the fact that most of the mining pools are located in China, whether they be Beijing, Chengdu, generally are the main offices. I think some have their offices in Hong Kong or Shenzhen as well. And this sort of misleading narrative suggests that China constantly controls the majority of the network hash rate and is in coordination with one another and can take control and attack the network at any time. This obviously isn't the case. It would take a massive undertaking that would be very noticeable very quickly should the state or all the miners in China decide to collude with one another and destroy their own incentives.
Right. So the pools are in China because the energy is cheap there, but those people in the pool could be anywhere in the world. It's not all Chinese people in the Chinese pool. It's from all over the world. So this idea that, these Chinese pools control Bitcoin is a misnomer, correct?
Yeah. People connect to all different sorts of pools who are mining from all different parts of the world. And as Jan previously said, it takes a matter of minutes to switch your hash rate from one pool to another. So the idea that someone would step in and use the pools as an attack vector, even if they were to succeed, the hash rate would flow so quickly to other pools that were not colluding that it would be easily subverted.
Right. So the game theory that's built into the Bitcoin stack, it operates on a number of different levels, and that the one that you just described is yet another layer of the game theory of the Bitcoin protocol, where it always tends toward decentralization. This is what's unique about the protocol, unlike anything else like proof of stake or any of these other altcoins that are demonstrably more centralized. You see this phenomenon in Bitcoin where it's always pushing toward greater decentralization. Now, when you talk about the great hash rate migration, for those who don't know what that means, that's about chasing cheap energy, right?
Correct. Yeah. So during the rainy season, because hydro is so plentiful in Sichuan, I believe upwards of 50% isn't even used in the region because, of course, it's difficult to transport that energy, far distances, and it's not really practical in a lot of cases. So this means that miners can enjoy electricity prices below 3 cents per kilowatt hour. To put that into perspective for people that don't know too much about electricity pricing, the estimates from most recent reports from, say, like BitUda or Galaxy has miners paying on average around 5 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour. So if you can get all-in hosting rates for your machines at 3 cents or lower per kilowatt hour, you're extremely competitive when compared to many other miners across the world.
Now, is Slushpool, do you have any operations out of China, or is anybody allowed to operate their mining equipment out of there, or do you have to have a Chinese partner?
So are you referring to some of our customers are from China?
No, your actual mining rigs, who can take advantage of that cheap electricity in Sichuan?
Yeah, so the people that can take advantage of it are really anyone willing to pay the hosting rates. The industry tends to be a little bit more compartmentalized and specialized in China. It's not as vertically integrated as you see some of these other operations starting to kind of expand into in North America and other parts of the world. There's, the sector of the industry that are really concentrated on hosting. There's the sector of the industry that's really concentrated on managing the machines. And then, of course, there's the miners themselves that simply procure, buy the machines, and then enlist the services of others to run them. So long as you're in contact with these hosters or the people that own the facility or sources of energy, and you can negotiate terms that you're both happy with, any miner is able to use it. It's generally Chinese miners that take advantage of it mostly because they're best suited to do so, and maybe a miner from North America wouldn't feel comfortable with the potential risks of putting their assets in China because that makes them have a little bit less control over them potentially, and maybe subject to confiscation even though the risk is low. They don't want to deal with that. So anyone can host should they be comfortable with the risks and the terms.
So I have a quick question to jump in there about that, because when that great hash rate migration happens, the hash rate will dive, and is that true? And what happened when We had in Inner Mongolia some sort of coal mine explosion or coal electric plant explosion, and the hash rate, they say, like the mainstream media was saying, it dropped by 35%, and that this was evidence and proof that China controls Bitcoin. So what do you say about this FUD?
Well, that FUD, a lot of the FUD too said it came, I think Elon Musk even said that it came from a single power plant, which is just patently false. What happened is it was in Xinjiang, there was flooding in a plant and some workers got trapped, and sort of to save face and also make an example, the local authorities, the provincial government, decided to do large province-wide inspections and close down a lot of the plants in the area, which amounted to about 2 to 3 gigawatts of electricity, which is massive. And so because a large part of Chinese mining is concentrated in Xinjiang during the dry season, basically December through May, the hash rate significantly dropped. They fail to say that the Bitcoin network continued to function perfectly amidst this drop and acted accordingly. And, there was more transaction fees in the blocks and miners started getting rewards, of more than 2 BTC in some of the blocks just from transaction fees. But it was anytime something like that happens, the FUD machine's going to turn on and start printing out as much as possible.
Yeah, it seemed like more of a successful stress test. Power went down, hash rate reduced, the difficulty adjustment kicked in perfectly as it's designed, and block, tick tock, next block every 10 minutes. The system went on as usual. And so of course, there is competition from other regions now, and it's all based on energy. Our friend down in Texas, Marshall Long, he says he's not really in the Bitcoin mining industry. He's in the energy arbitrage industry. It's all 85% of the cost of mining is energy. So with that in mind, what we're hearing is that a lot of the mining is migrating to Texas because they've got great deals on energy. Is that true? And to what degree?
Yeah, Texas and recently has been sort of referred to as like a new mining mecca in North America, partially because of this cheap energy and ERCOT programs and grid balancing programs, which allows miners to take advantage of extremely cheap electricity should they be willing to turn off their machines during peak consumption hours and redirect the energy to places that need it. When that crazy snowstorm hit Texas, this was a good example of the benefits that some miners received, because I believe that some miners during that snowstorm for redirecting power back to the grid were receiving something like $9,000 per megawatt hour for turning off their machines, which was more profitable than actually mining itself. And so by making these agreements and participating in these grid balancing programs, which are good for all participants on the grid, they're able to mine much more efficiently and cheaply than other places in the nation. And this is the reason why this is happening in Texas, is because in West Texas, there's plentiful solar and wind, and as well as natural gas and energy from oil.
So what is your response to this boiling the oceans accusation that you guys are boiling the oceans and you're causing a lot of coal and carbon emissions?
Well, my opinion on this is that, first of all, this is not a bug, this is a feature. So essentially, we are paying certain price for having an immutable transaction history. And this is the unique game-changing thing that Bitcoin brought, that not too many people realize, and not too many people who speak about altcoins really do realize like how fragile an alternative proof of works could be if anybody cared to really attack them. It's attacking Bitcoin itself is kind of difficult. So to me, the amount of energy consumed is not really relevant, because we have seen proof that, and you're seeing it now with the Shenzhen Sichuan thing moving, that miners are trying to seek places with the cheapest energy because they have direct incentive to reduce their cost, and the energy probably exists, right? It's being produced, it just needs its customers. The second part about heating the oceans, well, I think part of the miners are still trying to find a use of the excessive heat. But again, it goes down to the fact that humanity already produces that energy, and that needs to be somehow used. You can't really store energy in an efficient way.
I think it's just a big meme, because people generally tend to freak out when they look at the Bitcoin mining network's energy consumption. They go, "Oh, it's larger than Belgium now. Oh, it's larger than Argentina. Oh, it's larger than the Czech Republic in 2016." And simply looking at energy consumption doesn't really tell us anything about emissions. And especially since what we've been talking about recently is just this huge migration towards hydropower in China, the taking advantage of grid balancing programs in Texas. We could go into how Bitcoin mining can reduce methane venting or oil flaring, or gas flaring, excuse me, which is extremely harmful to the environment and is responsible, according to the International Energy Agency, for 25% of global emissions. They seem to gloss over those facts and just say, look at how much energy it uses, ignoring the fact that energy consumption does not equal emission, and they're two very different metrics. And it's rather disappointing.
Yeah, and they're talking in competition about the U.S. dollar, the fiat money U.S. dollar, which literally has the name petrodollar. It's literally a dollar that's backed by oil and gas, and 160,000 terawatt hours a year of energy is used on the planet. 60% of it is completely wasted. Now, with Bitcoin, which uses less than 1/10 of 1% of that 160,000 terawatt hours per year, it's actually generating something useful that disintermediates the central banks, disintermediates fiat money. So therefore, in a Bitcoin standardized world, you'd have total energy usage cut in half, right? So in other words,
yeah,
the energy FUD is so ludicrous and so stupid and so ill-founded that the only people who could come up with it are people who are addicted to fiat money. And that's what happens to people addicted to fiat money, is it turns their brains into mush, or I should say musk.
And you highlight a good point with that, is that it's all relative, right? You can't simply look at the energy consumption of Bitcoin mining solo and expect to draw any meaningful conclusions from it. To build off your petrodollar point, the U.S. military, which supports that system, consumes about 100 million barrels of oil a year, emitting about 59 million metric tons of CO2, which is by itself is much larger than the Bitcoin network. The best estimates I've seen are from Ben Gagnon, the head of operations over at Bitfarms, who uses Digiconomist data as well as our in-world data, and arrives at a figure of around 46 million metric tons. So it's less than the U.S. military. And another point you raised is that those 46 million metric tons are producing an immutable, censorship-resistant money that is out of the hands of state actors and in the hands of the individual, whereas the other system, which is polluting more and consuming more energy, is going to, causing destruction or protecting the interests of a few, basically the U.S. government in this case.
Well, we're in this deranged situation at the moment of global lockdowns, hyperinflation in the money supply, for sure. Like, the money printing is crazy. And one thing that emerged from these global lockdowns is that the United States doesn't actually produce much. We don't produce many of our needs. And we were kind of left stranded and helpless here. We couldn't make masks. We couldn't make any of the PPE, the supplies for hospitals, nothing. So, the question I have right now is, we also have a semiconductor chip shortage going on, and apparently it's getting worse and worse. We hear all these stories about ASICs being in short supply. So how is the supply chain right now in the Bitcoin mining space?
It's pretty overburdened at the moment. The demand is definitely outstripping supply. This is reflected in ASIC pricing. So for the first time in mining history, really, you have individual rigs being priced over 10,000 USD, sometimes upwards of 14,000 USD. The used market is going absolutely bonkers. Late last year, you could buy an Antminer S9 for approximately $20 with the PSU and everything included. It wouldn't include shipping, but for all the actual hardware itself, you could get one for that. And now it'd be hard pressed to find an S9 outside of China for less than $400 a unit. So they've essentially 20x'd in price. And this is because it's directly correlated to the mining revenue. And generally what you see is that for a lot of hardware, the pricing will sort of trend towards a 8 to 10 month ROI period, depending on mining revenue. So since BTC has skyrocketed and manufacturers haven't been able to keep up with price action and demand, the hardware itself, all the way back to machines that were created in 2015, are increasing in price and being turned back on because even they are now profitable.
Right. That's totally against the accepted wisdom of the past few years that all this mining equipment becomes obsolete within 2 or 3 years. That has proven to be completely wrong. I'm thinking about back in 2011 in Prague when I went to that Bitcoin conference. I picked up a unit made by Butterfly Labs for $600. Should I turn it on? Can I get some Bitcoin out of that, or is that genuinely out of date?
That would be more of a lottery. Yeah, you won.
That's no good. Okay, I figured
They used to have this thing. It was like a USB thing as well. They had that you used to be able to stick in your computer and mine.
Yeah, the guys at Bitfury gave me 2 of those USB miners to stick in my laptop, which I turned it on, and Satoshi came out as a hologram. So I'm not sure if that was the intended consequence.
What were you saying, Jan?
Well, I said we use the blocker raptors. I mean, I don't know if these are the ones that you're talking about. We use them for developing Brains OS, so they're still useful. Not for actual mining, but they do some hashes, and you get some test results nicely. So they're useful.
Nice. Okay.
So if you guys were interested in hard data for the types of machines that can sort of disprove that sort of axiom that, these mining machines only last 2 years, Kareem Hemley he was at Coinmetrics, now he's over at Galaxy, has some really interesting Nonce Analysis that suggests that around 25% of the network is still S9s running from, and those came out in 2016. So their lifespan is definitely not 2 years.
What is Nonce Analysis?
So essentially, each chip that is used for mining has a certain fingerprint when it tries to search the nonce space. So when you're looking for blocks, the chip is doing a very simple operation. It's iterating a simple counter that is 4 bytes, and it tries to do the SHA-256 double hashing and comparing it to the current target. And if it hits the target, then it outputs the result. And by the nature, the chips don't search the whole space. So you would see bits that are never used in the nonces, because they never get they never get touched by the chip itself. So you can basically see from a statistical analysis of the found blocks, when you draw the nonces, you would see biases. It's sometimes displayed as like blank areas in the chart that are never touched. And each generation of the chips has a different pattern. And the reason they made this is not like I want to have a certain fingerprint in the nonce, but it's just by the amount of internal hashing cores that the chip has, which is different for a chip that is in S9, which is 1387, I think, and compared to the new generation chips that have like 600 cores. So those have completely different fingerprint in the nonce space.
It's very thorough. I was just going to say it was a digital fingerprint.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I've seen the graphic
the
representation of the nonce search is you see the spaces, right? And you see you see all the dot chart, I guess you could call it, and you see those spaces. So that's the visual representation of what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's not, is that God speaking to us? That's what Max might think.
Well, no, I mean, it's part of the aesthetics of Bitcoin, which are beautiful. And I think it attracts a lot of people to think beyond the technology. What is the aesthetic beauty of this? And how does it relate to our relationship to aesthetics? And so with people like Michael Saylor or Robert Breedlove or Gigi, they when they start talking about the philosophy of it and everything, spiritual aspect to it, you can start to see in the design, elements of it that are, splendid and beautiful.
I never thought about it like this. Maybe I'm too deeply in the engineering side of the things, how the chips operate internally. And we have seen a lot, not like nonlinearities and all these kind of things, but let's not get into this.
Okay, so we're talking about mining rigs. We're talking about ASICs, chip design. We mentioned the difficulty adjustment. And within the difficulty adjustment, you've got the target number, right? And the target number is between 0 and 1, correct?
No.
All right. What?
I
Okay.
will. Okay, so to summarize this, essentially, Bitcoin mining is built around 256 bits of search space. So essentially, any nonce that you put into the block header, and when you do the hashing, the output is something that is 256 bits long. And when a Genesis block was found, it had difficulty 1, which was a portion of this 256 bits of search of the space that the hash function produces, and essentially, so you're trying to find something that is defined by Satoshi as 4f's shifted to the left by 28 bits. This is the number. This is the target that corresponds to difficulty number 1 that was used to find the Genesis block. And the current difficulty is probably a couple billions. So the search space is proportionally this smaller, and the ASICs are trying to hit the golden nonce so that the hashed value of the block header, or the double hashed value, fits into this space. I can look up in the current blockchain explorer what the current difficulty is, but it's somewhere in the billions, unless Edward already has it somewhere.
All right. Okay.
I think.
So,
Billions.
as hash rate goes up, the difficulty number gets harder to find, right? And doesn't it get essentially, it's preceded by more zeros?
Yes.
And therefore it gets smaller.
The target gets smaller. The difficulty gets higher. That's right. Just the opposite. So when you're referring to something that is between 0 and 1, what you would have to do is you would have to take the current value of the target, which is, again, mathematically 4f's shifted to the left by 28 bits, and then you divide it by the difficulty. This is your target. And then if you divide this target by the whole search space, then you get something that is between 0 and 1. And this is actually the probability of you finding a block with the next hash that your machine computes.
Right. So again, the target number is between 0 and 1. You just said that.
The ratio of the target.
Right. Okay. The ratio of the targets between 0 and 1.
We're probably too, I don't know. I'm too into the mining itself and how the rigs work. So I never thought about the target of being between 0 and 1. But technically, yes, you're right. But the miners who write the firmware, they are interested only in the target. So which is
okay.
A huge
So
number
here's my question. So it's talking about aesthetics of Bitcoin. Do you find it aesthetically pleasing that as the price goes higher and higher, the target goes infinitely more smaller? Isn't that remarkable? And don't we live in a galaxy of these two extremes of high price and infinitely getting smaller target number? Yes or no?
Oh yeah, I like it. And what I like even more is that most of the people don't realize how 2 to the 256 huge number is. I think if there are, and I would be wrong by a couple of magnitudes, but I think the amount of atoms in the space that we kind of assume there is, it's something like 2 to the 137. So we're still somewhere like halfway through that.
Okay, so the current hash rate is around, it recently reached the high of 200 quintillion calculations per second. So the one of the benchmarks that I heard about is like, well, there's approximately 7 quintillion grains of sand on planet Earth. So this is now almost 7 times greater than the number of grains of sand on planet Earth is being calculated every second as part of the Bitcoin protocol. And it relates to, can a government come in and suddenly take over Bitcoin? And the answer is that, my question is, does any government, can they harness that amount of computational ability, or has the network blown past the ability of any government or any group of governments to harness the calculation ability to stage a 51% attack on Bitcoin? And what would you say to that?
I think it's past the point where it would be really viable, or I guess practical, to do so. I think when Bitcoin was a lot younger, it would have been easier, maybe viable. But if you look at the logistics of pulling off something like that, You would have to look at which countries are best suited to do that, and that would probably be the US and China. And then you'd have to look at incentives. If you were to take China, for example, maybe they would have the easiest time because the hardware manufacturers are concentrated over there, so that they would maybe have the easiest times procuring the machines. This would be a multi-year undertaking, not only in trying to confiscate existing machines that as soon as people found out they were trying to do this, they would likely try to move the machines out of the country. This would be very easy to recognize globally that this was happening. Information travels extremely fast now. And that if they were to sort of try to buy all the ASIC manufacturing capacity, this would also be immediately noticeable because no one would be able to buy ASICs. And then, then you have to move up to the chip foundries. Would they be able to command enough pressure or geopolitical pressure on a company like TSMC to make them ignore, all their existing customers, or rather some of their largest existing customers, in order just to provide chips for, say, this government? And so, like, when you look at all the factors and all the assumptions you have to make to successfully pull off a state attack, it's just not really, I don't think it's very viable at this point.
Right. And I just was watching an Andreas Antonopoulos video, and he was addressing this. And one of the points he made was that, okay, you get a 51% attack. Effectively, you then would have to have the nodes acknowledge the longest chain, the longer chain there. And we would anticipate that the nodes would ignore that longest chain. So the most you could get would be one double spend on one block, and you just spent billions of dollars. So again, the economics are crazy stupid against this ever happening.
Exactly. I think he also said that before it ever got to that point, any government that tried this would soon realize that it's in their best interest just to participate in the network and receive the Bitcoin.
I saw the same video, exactly. So that's part of the game theory, because we're gonna do an attack, and then pretty soon they're like, wait a minute, why don't we just, grab Bitcoin, right? And then they get pulled into the Bitcoin.
The protocol.
They get pulled in. It eats them.
I want to ask you about Taproot. As we're conducting this interview right now, 94% of miners are signaling support for it. What is Taproot? Do you support it? How will it benefit the network?
Oh, just a short summary, because it's outside of the mining area for me. But generally, Taproot is a great privacy upgrade to me that will allow better smart contracts running on Bitcoin. If it's get integrated into Lightning Network, it's gonna serve as a privacy tool in there. So I see it as a really good piece of technology that made it, along with Schnorr signatures, into the Bitcoin protocol stack. So I'm super excited about this, and I think it's gonna happen in the short trial period, or what they call it, this first attempt to get it into Bitcoin Core.
Right. So now it's time for us to move to the bigger picture philosophical thing, because you mine Bitcoin, and, this is separating state from money. And I want to bring your background into this, Jan, because you grew up in Czechoslovakia, which was a command and control economy in the Eastern Bloc, as it was called. You were kind of under Soviet power, like
that is true,
under their wing. So do you see anything at the current time when we're in this lockdown? I mentioned all the money printing. We have trillions upon trillions of dollars being printed, money being sent all over the place to Americans, just like checks after check after check. And what do you feel about, is Bitcoin needed right now? Is this an important next step for individual sovereignty and freedom? Do you have any sort of comparison at all between what you're witnessing in the Western monetary authorities and what you saw growing up under the Soviet sphere?
Well, maybe to start with, it is not directly comparable in a way that the prosecution and the criminal charges against innocent people who were trying to speak up were completely out of imagination of what the Western people can imagine. And the further to the east you go, the more brutal it was. It started somewhere with Stalin, right? And probably a small fraction of this was being applied to the former Czechoslovakia and all that region, but it was still pretty brutal. So it's it is difficult to really compare this, because even though you, like, let's say we're having the podcast here, so you can say US government sucks, you can say US dollar sucks, you can really speak up against this, and I'm assuming you're not going to get into jail the next day you walk out to a grocery store, which is the fundamental change. I know there, if we take an example of Ross Ulbricht and what happened to him, that's somewhere in that era what was happening in the Eastern blocs, and I'm not like super okay with that. And he has been, charged as an exemplar, or as an example to really make a big, thick warning for anybody trying to do anything like this. And that's somewhere in that region, because basically the U.S. government ruined his life, and I hope he's going to get out of the jail eventually. But this is something that kind of matches what we have seen in the past. But in terms of what you're asking about the money printing, it is not just the U.S. Government. It's happening like all over the globe. And essentially, the central bank, policies, they just make up their own rules. I mean, if you run a private company, all you have to care is about if it's economically sustainable. But the government doesn't have to care, because they either print the money, or they create the inflation by taxing you, and you basically have to make sure that you make enough to get by. What I call this time, even in Europe, among my friends, is that I'm seeing this is getting into something like a digital totality. I don't know if you're seeing this in the US, but like for us, the situation is that you're basically, through the digital technologies that we're using, are being observed by the government. You do a bank transfer and you're going to get asked, like, where do you get the money from? And it's not a taxation problem. This is perfectly okay. But the problem is really that you have to explain. So there is this assumption of the government that you are always the criminal and you have to defend yourself. It's not the case that somebody shows that you are a criminal and now you have to defend yourself, but it is just by default. So this is what I'm seeing in Europe, and I would be curious if something like this is happening also in the US. And sorry if I have sidestepped your
no. Well, let me follow up on that. So I get the what you're saying there, that by comparison, the Soviet era was outrightly brutal. And folks, if I say, hey, certain things, I can say that America sucks, and I'm not going to be brutalized by the state. And so you can't really make an apples to apples comparison. But then you go on to say, like, you know what you're hearing from Europe is that on the monetary transaction front, it's becoming increasingly impossible, and an assumption of guilt before that transaction takes place. And do we see that in America now? Yes, we do. We're seeing more and more the state is becoming invasive. The subtlety and the insidiousness of what we could call the surveillance state is growing. And it's not brutal in the sense that we would equate with the old Soviet Union, but it is quite dictatorial in the sense that people simply get deplatformed, or they get pushed off the grid, or they suddenly don't have access to banking facilities, or they don't have no health care, and they end up with a horrible opiate addiction. So I guess the question is, although it's not the equation of a brutality as such, the question is, given your background and your view of the world and your history, do you see any kind of a creeping trend toward a totalitarian nature?
Yes, and that's what I called it in my last sentence. I said that basically I'm seeing signs of digital totality here. So basically all our acting in real life is actually very much associated with our digital presence. and it's difficult to get by because most of what we do is linked to online communication. And it's a convenience that the humanity now has the opportunity to work very efficiently. We are talking now, and you're on one end of the world, Edward is in South America, I'm somewhere else, and this gives us a lot of opportunity. But I think we're seeing signs that governments did realize this quite a long time ago, but now it's being used against the people. And I would say this is a global problem already, not just the US or not just Europe. And we're seeing it like all over the place. And you're just confirming my theory that this is also happening in the US. So I believe Bitcoin, and this is actually the answer to the FUD saying, oh, Bitcoin is heating up the oceans or it's taking too much energy. But this is actually we have a unique opportunity to have an alternative to this totalitarian things that are coming into our lives, which some of the people that are speaking against it don't see currently. Maybe it's important to realize that I'm not mad about the FUD things. I take it as part of the game and of the game theory, as Max said. Because if the FUD was successful in destroying Bitcoin, it's actually not a bad thing, because it would be proof for us that we don't have a better alternative to the existing system. So until Bitcoin exists and doesn't die, I mean, it already died a couple of times, right? We still have a hope that this approach is the right way as a counterbalance to the global totality that is slowly stepping into our lives.
Right. And I think the mindset, the totalitarian mindset, is the thing you see quite evidently emerging in the elite class, because it's always the elite, right? They're the ones that are losing power. And you see like this weird partisan divide emerging, not only in the US, but in Europe, as you mentioned. You see like this weird right-left that seems almost manufactured, and you see the deplatforming. Like in the United States, we saw that Parler, there was a social media app developed basically for right-wing conservative people who were being deplatformed from Twitter and Facebook. So they invented their own. And then what happened? They got taken off Apple. They got taken off all the Amazon Web Service. So that seemed totalitarian. That seemed like a next step. And this sort of viciousness and angry, like, get those people, get those people. You mentioned Ross Ulbricht. Some people will be like, well, he dealt drugs, and there was like, the prosecutor said that he had some sort of hitman he was going to hire. But Julian Assange, Julian Assange seems like definitely something that you would have seen in the Soviet sphere back in the day.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, these trends are very alarming. It's one thing. So before I got into the whole Bitcoin mining thing, I was actually a PhD researcher in history, and then I've also lived for 3 years in China, working in this industry as well. And generally, like since the 19th century, what you see from almost all nations is a gradual expansion of centralized sort of federal powers, or authoritarian in some cases. And you saw it for good reasons after the Civil War in the United States, with the sort of solidification of the Union and the trumping of federal powers over states. But then you start seeing it negatively approaching into the 20th century. You see the government overstepping with prohibition and entering into people's homes without warrants, and to bust up, illegal moonshine operations. You see it with the expansion of the Great Depression. You see it expand even more under World War II. You see it expand more into the Red Scare, and especially under Nixon, and with the expansion and creation of these intelligence agencies in the 20th century. You see it more, and it's kind of a slow creep in the West, which is why people don't notice it as much. But the thing that's really sort of frightening to me is the appetite for some of these Western liberal democracies to take advantage of some of these digital infrastructures to basically practice some of the same things that authoritarian regimes do. It's more blatant in places like China that are using kind of like the trifecta of facial recognition technology and cameras everywhere, with a digital yuan or currency in combination with like a social credit system. That's very blatant and obvious and authoritarian and scary. But what isn't as obvious, and what happens over a slower period of time, is sort of the gradual expansion and centralization of powers into federal authorities like the federal government of the United States or the European Union or the various governments of Europe. Any government, if they could, would ban cash and have total surveillance, and because it's in their best interest to do so. So I think it's up to each individual to support things, I would say, like Bitcoin, to ensure that they don't ever get that total power.
Yeah, I'm curious about Slush Pool. You guys, when you come to work, what percentage of your motivation is running a business, making money, and what percentage is some of these other issues that we're talking about relating to, I think you could call them human rights. And additionally, when I think about, let's say, Google, when it launched, remember their motto was "Don't be evil." And then within 20 years or so, they have become part of the surveillance state apparatus. And so many would argue that they've totally gone back on that pledge. But over there at Slush Pool, do you feel this human rights element at all in your day-to-day, because you are running a business, and so your stakeholders in that business might not have any interest in that, but how do you come to work, and how does that play into your day-to-day mindset? And do you have a feel, and are you going to go the way of Google and completely repudiate everything you believe in and become a surveillance state monster? Your thoughts?
I'll let you start with that one, Jan.
Okay. So I'll probably divide it into three parts. Like 1/3 of my heart goes towards the business part, so it needs to be profitable. 1/3 that I don't know if you expected, but I'm an engineer, so I want things that are interesting in terms of software and hardware engineering, and that's the motivation for me. So just watching and being able to work on cutting edge technology. I don't know too many people who work with 7-nanometer chips and really trying to get the last drop of power out of them. And the last, and I would say the most important one, is probably the political aspect of why we're trying to build this anti-government system. If we want to call it anti-government, it could be a parallel thing. But I as a software engineer, IT guy, I don't have too many choices. Finding a job where we would have this overlap, where it's trying to change the world, and we may fail, whatever. But I just feel that I'm not wasting my career. Like, I would feel really bad for like putting my career just into some business where I would make just money, but would get burnt out after a couple of years and would not see anything behind me, not just the products, but something that is meaningful. And it was really hard for me to find something like that. And when I found Bitcoin, it was not that, I don't want to say that, oh, when I saw Bitcoin, I saw, whoa, this is it. It took me a few years to really like figure out what's the underlying value of Bitcoin and why it's worth spending your time and your productive life, because now it's been like 8 years we've been into this. I'm like 41, so I'm not going to change my domain of where I'm working now. To make the decision, like the career decision, where you want to go, if you want to build rockets or if you want to do this. So to me, there are probably only two career branches that I would take. Either this, I'm looking back, okay? So I was not sure at that time. I would probably do this or build rockets. Not with Mr. Musk, let's say, but these two things I find very, very interesting and, let's say, satisfying, because they're changing something that humanity has. And like I said, the most attractive thing on Bitcoin to me is that we have immutable digital history. I mean, it just sounds like something that you find on the street, but no, you don't. It's here. It's been bootstrapped 10 years ago, and it's going to be difficult to find an alternative for something like that.
I would split it up similarly. Like, I'd say half of it for me is just that it's a really interesting field. It's very fast paced. You never really get bored. There's always something going on, always something to do, which is really important to me. But the other half is reflected in, the conversations I have with some friends and colleagues, similar to what you were saying, Max, that, I'm very unsatisfied with some of the existing systems, whether it be the banking system, whether it be how the government collects and spends taxes, my tax dollars. whether it's all the money laundering I see banks do, whether it be needing permission to use my own money to transact or to defend myself in any transaction I make. And before, I didn't really know of any way to opt out of these systems. I felt like, despite disagreeing with them and seeing them as corrupt and a net negative for most of humanity, that I was just sort of stuck with them. But with my sort of accidental stumbling upon Bitcoin, I not immediately, but quickly saw it as a way to opt out of these systems and sort of navigate through the world without ever having to be a part of all the bullshit.
Right. So you went from studying history to making history. And Jan, you went from dreaming about making rockets to actually Bitcoin is a rocket, right? It's taking us to the moon and beyond. So you both achieved your dreams.
Still a lot of work ahead of us.
Yeah, a lot of work. I'm 29, so there's hopefully many years ahead.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the Orange Pill podcast. This has been fantastic. Thank you. I learned a lot.
Thanks.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Real pleasure. Thank you.
All right. That was pretty awesome. And that segment was brought to you by our sponsor, the sunexchange.com/orange pill. We're going to go to their ad right now.
Sun Exchange is the world's first peer-to-peer solar leasing platform. Earn Bitcoin solar power in communities in Africa and be part of the new world economy. Visit thesunexchange.com/orange pill and start monetizing sunshine today.
All right. All right. So, Max, a lot of information was delivered there. I think you converted Jan to your way of thinking about the beauty of the nonce and the difficulty, the target, the ratio of the target.
Yeah. I think, he's thinking about the aesthetics and the beauty now of the target number and the nonce pattern in terms of relating it back to chip architecture. And you can see that graphically displayed, which I looked at. And it just is an amazing chart because it's an image that until Bitcoin came around, we've never seen ever in the history of the world. We've never seen a chart like that and what it means. And you can just kind of study it for a while and think about it and talk to Jimmy Song about it. Of course, he co-authored that book, Thank God for Bitcoin, where they get into this spiritual aspects to things. So, and I think that's still being interesting. People are still, the thing about Bitcoin is that it's a mystery that's still unfolding.
Yeah. And it's funny because, throughout history, the Luddites, they always say, are the ones that are trying to stop progress and advancement. And you realize, in this new era, that the Luddites are the likes of the elite, are the MSNBC, CNN, the New York University professors like Princeton professors like Paul Krugman or Nora Rubini at NYU. The gatekeepers are the Luddites, right? They're the ones that are the most ferocious about preventing the sort of advancement that our guests from Slush Pool are offering humanity, and essentially.
Yeah. It's interesting also because Edward is a PhD in history.
Yeah.
And Jan is an engineer. You associate Bitcoin more with engineers, and but the way Edward comes across though is very concise and very precise. He comes across like an engineer. The way he just his sentence structure, etc. Everything is very, very precisely articulated. And usually in the history field, it's there's a lot of revisionism in history. There's a lot more of it's more subjective. It's not a quantifiable science really because we don't have the records of history. So history professors are usually the notion is that they are more, of a wandering mind type of thing. But here he seemed like, very precise. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So these two, they seem to make a really good match. So Slush Pool itself, it sounds like they are just hitting the ball out of the park. It seems like things are going great over there.
So I think history is right now, we are making history where a part of the cycles of history, whether it's Thucydides' trap, the fourth turning, the cycles of inevitability that happen, the plebs versus the patricians, the plebs versus the toffs, the plebs beheading the monarchies. Like, I think this is like a nonstop cycle. So in a way, like, history is a matter of cycles. History is those contracts in stone that we talked about on the last microdose from the Hittites 5,000 years ago. Like, there's history is the first tablets, and what were our first words? The first words were about money owed, about debts owed to each other. So I think, it makes sense in a way, because this is it's basically Bitcoin is the same as those Mesopotamian tablets, I think, and the Hittite tablets, and like it's part of it's the ancient Greeks, it's the Renaissance, it's the Enlightenment, it's all of those things, and it's all like in one.
Yeah, curious if he likes this idea of Renaissance 2.0. Is that what it's all about? I mean, he's a history guy. I'm wondering what his thought would be. And next time we have a chat, we should delve into it.
Well, we're definitely going to see him down in Miami, and he mentioned that in the program. So we're going to see him down in Miami, and we'll maybe ask him about Renaissance 2.0. I know he's like, they came on to talk about slush pool and to negate this FUD. So I'm glad they did that. And again, the schedule for this next week upcoming is we're going to do 2 microdoses. We're going to do one on Tuesday and one on Sunday. So we're not going to do a full dose like this with a guest and stuff. It's just going to be me and Max on the microdose on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And then we're going to do the same on Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to be there live streaming with double-fisted margaritas, perhaps by me. Who knows? Like, we'll see. And because we're getting ready, we'll be heading off to Miami, getting ready to head there and having to do, some of our Kaiser reports, some of the Orange Pill podcast, putting that all together. And all of these episodes, of course, are brought to you by thesunexchange.com/orange pill. And if you were getting to stack some sats during these crashes, the dips, the dips for ants, as we might say in the OG space, or people who have endured enough crashes, you can go to swanbitcoin.com/orange pill. And I guess one final note is that, 2 things. Leave in the comments whether you say plebe and spell it Pleeb, if that's how you pronounce it, or is it pleb? And so write that Pleb, just one E, right? And the second thing is, of course, the YouTube channels are plagued in the comments section with replies to your comments, and they'll be telling you, they'll act like they impersonate us, essentially. They're imposter accounts. And, they'll be asking you to call them on WhatsApp. Please don't do that, because it's not us. Speaking of Elon Musk, did you see the story that there have been $2 million stolen from people in America in the last 6 months by imposters, impersonators of him?
No. Wow. That's the way it goes, man. What did P.T. Barnum say? Sucker born every minute.
Exactly. Don't be a sucker. All right. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, y'all.